So typically communicating with Plaid is a pretty standard request response pattern, right? Like you send us a request and we send you back a response and you repeat this over and over until your company gets acquired, I guess. Congratulations. But every once in a while, we need to talk to you outside of this pattern and send you some information out of band. And in order to do that, we like to use something called webhooks, and I'm going to show you how to handle those on today's episode of Plaid Academy. So like I said in the intro, most of your communication with Plaid is going to be in a pretty standard request response format. Your server sends a request to the Plaid API and we send you back a response. But every once in a while, we're going to need to send you information without your sending us a request first. Most of these situations fall into three general categories. One, a process that you kicked off a while ago is finally complete, and we wanted to let you know that the information you requested is now ready. Two, we have some new information for you, and you should probably ping our servers to find out more. And three, there's some kind of problem, and you should work with your users to fix it proactively before there's a major disruption to their service. And so for these kinds of messages, we use a webhook. Now, when it really comes down to it, a webhook is basically just an endpoint on your server that's available for us to call. The same way your server's handling REST requests from your clients, a webhook is just another endpoint that receives HTTP requests from Plaid. The main difference between this endpoint and your other endpoints are really less technical ones and more conventions. Specifically, webhooks are really designed for one-way communication. A typical API response might return a whole bunch of data, but a response to a webhook usually won't return much besides, say, a 200 status code. And I would say in most cases, webhooks aren't really intended to be used by your clients. They're generally used in server-to-server communication from third-party services like Plaid. So to get started with webhooks, you're going to need to do three things. One, you're going to need to tell Plaid what endpoint on your server Plaid should talk to. Two, you're going to need to make sure Plaid can actually reach that endpoint. And three, you'll probably want to do something meaningful in your server code once you receive that webhook. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add a webhook to an application that uses plain old vanilla JavaScript on the front end and Node.js on the back end. Now, you don't need to be an expert at either one of these technologies, as long as this isn't your first time running NPM and you have a relatively recent version of Node, you should probably be okay. So if you want to follow along with me, and I highly recommend you do, you'll learn all sorts of useful stuff that way, go ahead and clone our tutorial resources repo from GitHub. You can find it here at this address or linked in the description below. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it and hop into my favorite terminal window and git clone it into an appropriate directory. Then once you've cloned the repo, head on into the tutorial resources/webhooks/start directory. Now this app is pretty similar to the other quick start apps we have, so if you've used either our quick start or tiny quick start in the past, this structure should feel pretty familiar to you. So we're going to get everything up and running by first running npm install. And then once that's done, I'm going to open up this directory in VS Code, but go ahead and use your favorite IDE. Now I'm going to copy this env template file over to just .env. And then I'm going to open that up and copy over my API and my sandbox secret from the Plaid dashboard into this file. I'm going to leave this webhook URL as is for now, but we'll get back to that later. Now I'm going to open up a terminal here and call npm run watch. This will automatically pick up changes to our server code later on, so we don't have to keep, manually rerunning it ourselves. And now let's open up our browser to localhost port 8000, and there's our app. So I'll click on this button to bring up Link, where I will sign into my favorite bank. This looks like a good one. Remember to go ahead and use usergood and passgood when it asks you for credentials, and 1234 if it asks for an MFA code. I will select a couple of accounts, agree to share my information, and when all that is done, I am back in my main page, where I can then retrieve my account balances, fetch some recent transactions, and request an asset report. And then down here, some UI to perform some important webhook testing, none of which is hooked up yet, so we can ignore it for now. Again, most of this code will look familiar to you if you've gone through any of our quick start apps in the past. Probably the only new thing here to call out is that I am saving our user's access token and the fact that they've connected with Plaid in this little user data.json file. This file helps to make sure my server can save user data between restarts, but it's still a lot simpler than having to install a database or anything. And if any of this seems new to you or you don't have any idea what's going on, make sure to check out the Getting Started video first, where I explain all this in much more detail, and then you can come on back to this one. And so the next question you might have is, okay, well, how do I get Plaid to start sending me webhooks? And the answer is you don't have to do anything. We're already doing it. Here, let me show you. So if you were to head on over to the Plaid dashboard, click on Activity, and then go down to Logs, you'll see a list of all Plaid activity associated with your account. And you'll see here that I can filter this list by just webhooks. And right up here are all the webhooks that Plaid has fired off recently. This one here is telling me the asset report I requested earlier is available and ready to download. This one is telling me that an initial batch of transaction data is available to download. And this one is telling me that I think like the last 60 days of transactions are now available to download. Granted, I think this happened a lot faster than I would expect in a real world scenario, but it still fires. And so that's the nice thing about working in sandbox mode is that even though you are working with completely fake data, Plaid will still send you the same kinds of webhooks as it would if you were working in production, which is great. But right now, while we're actively working on the logic to receive webhooks in our app, we might want this to happen more than it would in production. We might want to trigger these a little more manually. Luckily, Sandbox lets us do that, so let me show you how. Okay, so first I'm going to go into our client code and get this simulate a webhook button working. That code is here in index.js, this fire test webhook function. Now, like nearly any other Plaid API, the fire a test webhook method was designed to be called by our server. So I'm going to go ahead and make this function call, await, call my server, with the endpoint of server/fire test webhook and an argument of true to make it a post call, because that's the way it's set up on the server. This call my server function is just a little helper function that calls an endpoint on our server and prints out some handy debug messaging so we can see what's going on. Now this change is on the client, so I will need to refresh my browser to pick up this change, and then I can click on the button. And it's hitting our server, and it looks like what we're getting back is the to-do method. That's because this method exists on the server. I already added it for you, but it doesn't really do anything beyond sending back this to-do message. So let's open up server.js, our server code, and we can find fire test webhook down here. So we'll remove that line of code in this try block here, and let's implement this call for real. So we'll write in const fire webhook response equals await plaid client. That's the Plaid node client, which we've initialized already. And then we'll call sandbox item fire webhook, which corresponds to the sandbox/item/fire webhook endpoint. We need to pass in a few arguments here. First, we need our user's access token, which we can do by looking at user record and field access token. User record is just the contents of this user data.json file that I've loaded into memory. And then we need to actually define the webhook we're going to call. Now, all webhooks from Plaid contain at least two important pieces of information. First is the webhook type. This corresponds to the Plaid product or category that this webhook represents. And then you've got the webhook code, which is a text string that I'm pretty sure is powered by an enum underneath the hood. It represents the specific message we want to send you. And it's pretty common for different webhook types to have the same code. For instance, transactions/default update means there's new transaction information available for this user, and you should download it when you have a moment. And liabilities/default update means there's new liability information available that you should download when you have a moment. While holdings/default update means there's new information about the user's investment holdings, and so on. Now, our sandbox fire webhook endpoint supports 3 test webhooks. Transactions/default update is used when there's new transaction information available. This was a very commonly used webhook, but now that the new transaction sync API is out, and that's a topic for another video, you might not be using this one as much in the future. Auth/auth data update is kind of a weird edge casey webhook that I don't know if you're ever going to need, but item/new accounts available is pretty useful. If you're using the account selector and link where a user can pick a couple of accounts to share with you, this will let you know that the user has opened up another account with the same institution so that you can then prompt the user to share this new account with you. This is a great example of a webhook being proactive about giving you useful information. So let's go back to our code here, and we'll say that our webhook type is webhook_type.item, and our webhook code is sandbox item fire webhook request webhook code enum.new accounts available. Whew, thank goodness for autocomplete. So we'll return whatever data we get back from making this call, and we're good to go. So let me save this file and make this call again. And I get back a response telling me that the webhook has been fired. Nice. But that's all it tells me. If I want to see the status of this webhook, I got to go to the dashboard for that. So if I go back to my logs and reload, you can see there's my webhook in the logs. And if I dig into this further, I can see that my webhook is getting a 404 error, And that's because it's sending it to this example.com endpoint, which shockingly doesn't actually exist. So why is Plaid talking to this particular URL? Because when we first created our link token here, we had to supply a URL, and its value is taken from this variable here, which we read in from our env file when we first started the server. This means that when Plaid creates an item for a user, one of the pieces of information associated with that item is the webhook URL. So if Plaid needs to send off a webhook associated with any product connected to this item, it'll do so at the URL that's associated with this item. One exception to this is asset reports. They're a special snowflake, and I'll talk about them later. So let's change up our webhook so that it points to a place where we could actually, receive it, and we can see what the webhook payload looks like. Now, the thing about Plaid webhooks is that they are being sent by Plaid servers out there on the internet, and right now I'm developing on localhost, which means that right now Plaid servers can't reach my development server. So one fix would be to just deploy my code on a server somewhere. Then I could set up my webhook to point to my publicly available endpoint, and we are done. But maybe you're not quite ready for that, particularly during development, so let's explore some alternatives. One alternative, there are several sites out there that will receive webhooks and post their contents for you to see. 3 that I've used in the past are webhook.site, bscepter.com, and requestspin.com. And, this isn't an official endorsement for any of these products. They're just ones that I know work. So let me show you one of these. I'll head on over to webhook.site. It's the quickest to get started with. And it greets me with this page right here. Basically, it's automatically set up a webhook receiver at this randomly generated URL, which means that as soon as any data hits that endpoint, it'll show up here on this page. So let's try that. First, I'm going to stop my server. Next, I'm going to copy over this URL into my env file. Then I will also delete my userdata.json file to force me to create a new item with this new webhook URL. Now I'll start up my server again and reload my browser. Then I'll connect Plaid to another bank. And when I am done, I can head on over to my webhook.site page, and there you go. Here's a couple of webhooks telling me that the transaction data is ready to load. And if I were to click this simulate a webhook button, you can see that it's sending this item.newAccountsAvailable webhook to this page as well. And if we reload our dashboard, you can see that our webhooks are getting met with 200s now instead of 404s. So that's much better. Okay, pretty good progress, but it was kind of awkward that I had to delete my user's existing access token and create a brand new one in order to get a new webhook URL. Now, granted, when you're going to be doing this 98% of the time, it will probably be when you're in development, not after you've launched. But if you ever do find yourself in a situation where you need to change the webhook URL when you're out there on production, you don't want to be asking all of your users to go ahead and create brand new access tokens and connections and all of that. That would be terrible for all sorts of reasons. Luckily, Plaid has an API for us to change webhook URLs for existing items. So let's implement this update my webhook URL button. Now, just to keep things moving over in index.js, I've already added the code in for this button. So let's just uncomment it to, add it back in. And you can see here that it grabs the value of this text field, does some incredibly basic error checking, and then runs call my server with server/update webhook. The second argument is true because it's a post call. And for the post data body, I'm saying that new URL is this new webhook URL. So let's save this and implement the server-side code. So if we head over to the server, we can see our stub method for update webhook already created for us. Let's remove this line. And what we're going to do is grab our new webhook from request.body.url. And then we'll also need our user's access token. Remember, webhook URLs are stored per item, so we need to grab the access token associated with the item. And then I can say that update response equals await plaid client.item webhook update, and I will pass in our access token and the new webhook. And I'll return the data we get back just to make sure the call went through. Okay, so let's give this a try. Remember to refresh your browser page to load in the new client code. Okay, let me change our webhook back to something on example.com. I'll click send, and you can see in our JavaScript logs, we get back our updated item with an empty webhook URL. What happened here? I see. I'm reading in request.body.url here in my server code, and the actual parameter is request.body.newURL. So let's fix that up. Okay, that's better. Okay, so let's call this one more time, and okay, here's my new item with the actual webhook URL. And so I can fire a webhook, and you can see it's no longer hitting my webhook.site, and by reloading my dashboard, I can confirm it's now hitting this new endpoint over on example.com. So let's change it back to my webhook site. I'll copy the webhook URL from here, paste it in, click update, and it looks like it's gone through. In fact, back on my webhook.site page, I can see I'm actually getting a webhook that's telling me that this is going to be the new location for future webhooks. Now, as you may have noticed, webhook URLs are set by an item-by-item basis. And so this means that if, for some reason, you need to change the webhook URL for an application that's already been out there in production, you're going to need to do that for all items that are pointing to this webhook URL. So expect this to be a batch process that might take a little while. The second thing you might have noticed or remembered is that this doesn't affect assets. Now, assets are a special case because an asset report can represent multiple items, and because in theory those items could have different webhook URLs associated with them, Plaid might not know which URL is the right one to use when you request an asset report. So to address this, we simply ask you, the developer, to supply the webhook URL when you request the asset report. Since asset reports are a one-time request, you don't need to worry about updating saved webhook URLs the way you do with items. And so in our update webhook call, we save the value of our kind of global webhook variable to be our new webhook URL. And that will be the URL that our asset report uses, at least until we restart the server. The other special case, which I haven't really talked about yet, is that Transfer, a pretty new product at the time of this recording, doesn't use item level webhooks either. They use an account level webhook, which you can set and change here in the Plaid dashboard. I think the main reason for this is because you probably noticed that changing a webhook for a product that's out in production and might have thousands of items already created is a bit of a pain in the tuchus, particularly given that I think most items generally point to the same webhook URL anyway. So this way seems a little more convenient, and I wouldn't be surprised if new products adopt this approach in the future. The final thing you probably noticed is that while we can now see the contents of these webhooks, it's still not actually talking to our code. So this is fine if you're just kind of curious to see what types of webhooks get fired. But in our case, we want to be running code to actually handle these webhooks and do something intelligent with them. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we could actually test this code running on localhost against the Plaid webhooks before, we go ahead and deploy everything onto production. Here, let me show you what I mean. If you scroll down a little further, you'll see we have this endpoint called receive webhook running on our server. Let's fill this out so we can show you a little information about the webhook we receive. Now, ideally, when I ask Plaid to fire off a webhook, I want it to be able to hit this endpoint so my server-side code could respond properly. So to do that, I'm going to introduce you to one more tool called ngrok. Honestly, I'm guessing a lot of you know about this thing already, but basically ngrok is a nifty little utility that runs locally on your machine. And what it does is it basically opens up a tunnel from your machine to the outside world at some randomly generated address, which means that any traffic sent to that URL can get passed along to a local port running on your machine. In our case, that'll be port 8000 since that's where our server is running. I know there are alternatives to ngrok, but ngrok is probably the most popular option for this. Again, not an official product endorsement, I just think it's pretty neat. So if you want to follow along, the first thing we're going to do is install ngrok, which you can do from ngrok.com/download. Either download the file here and unzip it into your user/bin directory like it says here, or you can use something like brew to install it. Either way works, or, follow the specific instructions for your operating system. Now, once that's done, you're going to need to sign up for an account if you don't have one already. And then you'll need to add an auth key, which it will prompt you to do after you create an account. But in case you miss it, after you sign in, it should be here on the left-hand side under Getting Started. Just copy and paste that line into your terminal. You'll only need to do this once, and then you're ready to go. So here's what I'm going to do. My server is still running on port 8000. So I'm going to go back to my terminal window and type ngrok http 8000. So this basically says, let's open up port 8000 to HTTP, or I guess more accurately, HTTPS requests from the outside world. So what you'll see here in the terminal is that ngrok creates a public endpoint hosted at this randomly generated subdomain that forwards any traffic it receives to our localhost at port 8000. So here's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to copy this domain and I'll paste it into my update webhook URL field, and I will add on my path the server receive webhook to the end here. We'll update the webhook URL, and I'm going to simulate a webhook one more time. And if you look at the ngrok terminal here, we can see that we received a call to our receive webhook endpoint. And sure enough, in our server console, we can see that we've printed out the contents of the request body. Additionally, if I open up localhost 4040, ngrok comes with a nice little inspector that lets me see the requests that have come in and what I've sent back. So just to reiterate, what we've done here is we've told Plaid that it should send webhook URLs to this domain here, one that's hosted by ngrok out in the real world. And as long as I keep this process running, ngrok will essentially take those requests and forward them to my locally running server that's on port 8000. So this is pretty good, right? There's just one potential issue. Because ngrok is forwarding all HTTP requests to localhost 8000, it means not only is this webhook URL coming through, but all HTTP requests are coming through, meaning that I, and I suppose anybody else on the internet, could go to this URL here and see my entire application running instead of running it off localhost. Now, many times this is exactly what you want. Like if you want to show off your local build to like a coworker or a client or something like that, setting up a tunnel is an easy way of doing so without having to deploy. You just kind of set it up, share the URL, kill the tunnel when you're done, and that's that. But, particularly if you're working in Plaid's development environment and accessing real data, you might not want the rest of your application exposed to the world just yet. I mean, yeah, I'm guessing those subdomains are pretty darn unguessable, but when you're dealing with financial data, maybe that's not reassuring enough. So there's two ways to address this. One way is that ngrok itself allows you to specify what IP addresses are allowed to connect to your tunnels. And if you check our documentation here, you can see that all of our webhooks come from these 4 IP addresses. So you could set up a policy that only allows requests from these 4 IP addresses. But as far as I can tell, this is a feature that's only available if you're an enterprise customer, and that's $75 a month. Also, I'm not entirely sure how secure IP restrictions really are. That's probably beyond my level of expertise. So for the rest of us, there is another option, and that's to take this endpoint for receiving webhooks and run it on a different port than the rest of our server. We can just expose that new port on ngrok, and that'll leave the rest hidden. So here's what I'm going to do. Here, I'm going to Control-C here to kill ngrok, and that will immediately shut down this tunnel. And then let's go into our server code. So down at the bottom here, I'm going to go ahead and create a second Express app. We're going to say that webhook app equals Express. Through some copying and pasting, we'll set it up to use body parser URL encoded and JSON so we can interpret the data that comes in. And then we will start it on port 8001. I'm hard coding this port number, but we should probably stick it in our env file. And then I will just take our webhook code and cut it and paste it down here. I'll replace this bit of the code here so that it's part of webhook app running on our new port. And maybe I'll just add this line 2, which allows this new server to use the same error handling function as our other one. And that should pretty much do it. In fact, you can see that my webhook server is now running on port 8001. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my other terminal window, and I'll just create a new ngrok tunnel to point to port 8001. I'll get a new domain here, so I'll need to make sure I update that in my application. Make sure you go back to the browser window that's running your app on localhost and copy and paste this into the text field. Make sure to add on the server/receive webhook path. And let's give this one more try. This time, if I fire off my test webhook, it'll still hit my server running on localhost 8001, so I can analyze and process it. But if I were to visit this URL here, I'd get a 404 error instead of seeing the rest of my application because all that other stuff is running on port 8000, which my tunnel ignores. So all that's left at this point is to process the webhook that our endpoint is receiving, which brings up an important question. Should we have one single endpoint to handle all the different webhooks, or should we break it up somehow? Well, part of the issue is that webhooks are usually only set on a per item level, meaning that if you have an item that's being used with multiple Plaid products, you can't really provide different endpoints for those different products. I guess the exception for this would be in cases where you only run link with a single product. That would be cases like payroll, income, or identity verification. In those cases, maybe you could set up a separate webhook receiver just for like identity verification. But I think in practice, most developers tend to have a single endpoint that Plaid can call, and they simply call out to different methods depending on the webhook type and code. There's a couple of exceptions to this. Many companies have different endpoints for different environments, particularly if you don't want to mix up your sandbox and production data. And maybe if you have completely different applications or subsidiaries running under the same Plaid account, maybe you've got different endpoints for those. But that's about as far as it goes. So in our situation, the code for this will just be a big old switch statement where we'll have different methods to handle the webhooks for different products. Maybe a little something like this. I'll grab the product, which is the webhook type, and the webhook code, and then we can create a switch statement based on the webhook type where I'll pass in the code and the request body for each one. So for instance, if the item type is item, well, then this webhook has something to do with this specific connection between a user and their bank. And so we can handle that here. For instance, maybe there's an error and we need to ask them to connect their account again. Or there are new accounts available and we can ask our user to share those with us. For customers in Europe, or I think maybe Chase OAuth customers, this will let you know that their connection is going to expire in a few days and will want them to re-authenticate before it fails. Maybe the user has explicitly revoked permission for this item, so we'll want to remove it from our system. Or this one, which you've probably seen if you were following along, lets us know that Plaid has updated the address for the webhook URL. For transactions, let's create a separate method for that. And we have webhooks for when the initial batch of transactions are downloaded and ready to go. By design, we tend to not send down a lot of detailed information with our webhooks, but one piece of information we do send across is the number of transactions that are now available. There's a similar webhook for when we're done collecting the first batch of historical data, one for when there's new data, and one for when certain transactions have been removed, and then one for when there's new data for the sync API. And then for our asset reports, we have one webhook for when the report you requested is available to download. This is a process that usually takes several minutes, so it's good to listen for this webhook. And then one for when we ran into an error trying to generate your report. And, so on and so forth. If you want to see a full list of webhooks that might get sent for any product, check out the product-specific reference documentation. You'll see a list of all the webhooks that might get sent along with the breakdown of their payloads. Finally, I should make sure I always return something. Like I said, Plaid doesn't really care what data gets returned from your endpoint, but it does care about the status code because that's what it reports in the dashboard. So make sure that when you're all done processing this endpoint, just send back some kind of response that'll generate a 200. The only other thing I haven't covered yet is how to verify these webhooks. Honestly, this gets a bit into the weeds, so I've decided to save that as bonus material for a future video. So there you go. That's just about everything you need to get started with webhooks and how to implement this important bit of communication between Plaid and your application. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting content, and happy plaiding.